Alright then, so I took a little bit of time to essentially earn up the money to basically buy all the lore again on a new character. And then I'll basically test something because during my happenstance of leveling up with this character, I'm actually acquired a potion of undeath, so we get to test to see what happens when we basically quaff it. Can I enter Zigur after, or what happens? We'll see. Alright, so yes, basically I got the money here. And basically all the books there, of course, are not bought yet, but that's just because it's a new character, but that's fine. So Blackened Shoreline, let's go. Truly there was no place showing more damage in all of Maj'Eyal than its southern shoreline. Though I have not traveled to the eastern side of the continent, I can imagine it can't imagine being potentially being destroyed to the extent that it has been here. These lands will never fully heal, but I do hope it will serve as a reminder to the Shaloran to never brashly use magic in such a way again. Following the travel instructions that I received from the halfling, I proceeded south. I did not know why I didn't just travel north back home. Something about the anger burning within me fueled me to find the instructors of these masked fanatics. As I traveled south, the sky would begin to turn a shade of colors from blue to purple and then blackish red. And before long, I couldn't even see the sun anymore. There was no sign that any of the lands around me escaped the destructive energies of the Spellblazed here. Eventually, after a full day of travel, I set up camp near some burnt-out trees. There was little to forage for in destroyed wilderness, but I was able to find some edible berries and mushrooms to feed myself with and save on my provisions. The next day, I continued on my journey. After a few hours, I reached the southern shoreline, a grotesque sight to say the least. The waters bubbled as if being boiled, and the ground was charred black. What trees or plants that still stood were completely burnt, dead and lifeless, as was the wildlife that had not escaped, their corpses left untouched by the bugs and worms. Looking up, all I could see was dark clouds against a blackened sky. To the east, I noticed small pools of lava escaping to the surface. Some of the lava formed small lakes or streams of red-hot death, which I cautiously had to avoid. Looking to the north, I noticed the lands jaggedly shooting out unnaturally towards the sky. Moving closer towards the raised landscape, I noticed that they rose as high as a mountain in the distance. Climbing a hill, I saw how the unnatural rocks formed twisting chasms and pointy spikes that would almost certainly be suicide to traverse. Remembering back to the shoreline soldiers I had treated in Elvia, I quickly realized why they had moved northwards to come home. The center of the continent, where the Midvale Plains had been located, were now no more. Now the plains had been replaced by a deadly gaunt of rock that would certainly kill anyone inside it, and likely anyone who had been living on the plains before the Spellblaze. Beginning to travel through the devastated landscape, I had to be careful. As I made my way east, the light of the sun was seemingly snuffed out by smoke and debris of the area, and the only way I could see my footing was from the glow of the nearby lava dotting the landscape. I don't know for how many days I would travel eastward, but my progress through the lands was slow. Eventually I would see a river of lava flowing down to the open sea, and beyond that the burnt out remains of what I assumed was a forest. Seeing my way blocked, I looked north and noticed a clearing in the land, and so I continued my way there to see if I could find safe passage. I carefully made my way up the terrain to a plateau and saw a small opening appear in the jagged mountains up ahead. While the land I crossed was hilly, I was able to find decent footing through the lethal landscape of deadly drops and pitfalls. Slowly, I made my way through, finding a path leading downwards into what I hoped would lead to the other side. Suddenly though, in the distance I could see the figure of a group advancing fast towards me. Drawing closer to me, one of the figures in the group saw me, yelled out to the others, and they slowed to a cautious crawl. As they approached, I was a bit of a miss as to what race these beings were. They were tall, even taller than me, and I could see their bulging mass and muscles on their bodies from quite a distance away. Something also glistened on their skin, which as they grew closer I noticed to be the glowing insignias similar to those I saw in the ruins in Elvia. Getting into earshot, one of the beings finally called out, "If you plan on taking us back, be prepared for a fight." At that moment I realized that they were yet more victims of the mass fanatics. In a sign to show I wasn't hostile, I put my belongings on the ground and stepped back from them. The action seemed to take the beings back a bit, and though still on edge, they assumed a less aggressive stance. "You aren't aligned at all with those zealots, are you? My apologies for any distress we may have caused you." I merely shook my head as the words reached me, before proceeding to ask who they were and what had happened. "Never seen an ogre before, I assume? We are, or we were, a nomadic tribe that wandered the lands as peddlers. Mostly we sold ruins and infusions, but we also sold other various small trinkets too. Then magic rained down from the sky and the earth opened up, destroying everything and killing many. We immediately went to help those we could in a nearby human city." At this point tears began to stream down the ogre's face. Continuing to speak between sobs, the ogre continued, "I'm not sure why, but a small band attacked us." At this point the ogre began to cry to the point that he was unable to speak, and seeing this another ogre continued, "We were bound in chains and taken to a small settlement just beyond his path. There we were subjugated to insane experiments, something about cleansing us, and we witnessed a great many ogres die in grotesque and horrible ways. Realizing we would meet a similar fate, we broke out of our bonds and made to escape from our cages." The ogre paused for a bit, looking behind me at the devastated landscape, and then stated, "Although I'm not exactly sure where we may run to." Alright, so, much like, well, I guess I should probably just point it out. I'll note that basically prior to, like, this piece of lore that I basically wrote, there was no lore basically, like, really dedicated to the ogres besides, like, the Grey Knot's basically analysis of ogres and stuff like that, and all, all that stuff. But, that basically came in, like, the, Embers of Rage campaign. But, anyways, I basically wrote this lore because I wanted to have, like, I figure, like, if I'm basically writing a lore to, like, sort of, like, fill in the gaps of stuff that, like, we don't have in Maj'Eyal, the ogres really need to be mentioned. And something actually, like, that sort of bugged me, basically, in Maj'Eyal is that we didn't really have any, like, sort of reason for, like, why the ogres basically, like, start in Elvia, which is basically Shoreline capital. So, this, like, piece of lore here was basically the start of an attempt to basically, like, sort of, like, describe how the ogres basically came to, like, occupy the, like, the Shoreline capital. And, like, how they basically got there in the first place, really. I also know as well, by the way, before I actually wrote this, like, piece of, like, lore, the Krog were yet not invented, basically. So, I want to note that basically, like, this piece of lore that, like, sort of, like, describes, like, the events that are basically happening in, like, Zigur right now, which is basically to some of these guys are basically running from. These guys are basically, like, they were basically, like, what was being, like, tested on to, like, sort of figure out a way to, like, cleanse the ogres of, like, their, like, ruins and stuff like that, so they could be, like, completely natural, shall we say. And, this is Zigur, like, they were, like, they weren't necessarily trying to kill off the ogres, they were trying to, like, free them of, like, ruins, basically. But, they, of course, need ruins to live the ogres, so they had to basically figure out some sort of substitute to, like, keep them alive without, like, killing them. But, whatever. Let's just, like, keep on going on here. The Fleeing Ogres. There is so little that is known of the ogres, and seemingly they know little of themselves either. This may have to do with my seclusion from the outside world, but I wonder if this race only recently came to Maj'Eyal. Viewing the Shaloran archives, there is little mention of the ogres, and I don't believe even among the Faloran we know much about them either. I wonder where the ogres truly came from. So, for those who basically, like, know a little bit about the lore, basically, it's worth knowing that, like, the ogres were basically a manufactured race by, like, the Conclave back in, like, their wars against the halflings. And essentially, like, because like they were manufactured, there's not, there's like no, of course, like, real interaction between, like, the Thalore or the Shaloran, basically, with, like, the ogres, because they were, like, on the other side of the continent. The only ones who really, like, may have, like, noticed them would have been the Loran, with the elven races, but they, of course, were, like, lost basically in, like, the Spellblazed, so they're gone. So basically, like, the humans will basically know who the ogres basically are, I guess, and that's basically about it. But anyhow, let's just keep going on. I could feel the stares of the entire group looking past me, at the uninviting landscape. They did not know where they could run to, only to run. Looking to establish if I was indeed the masked fanatics they were running from, I asked. The zealots you speak of wear masks on their faces? The ogres immediately locked their stares back on me, the tense fear in their eyes telling me that the zealots they spoke of and the masked fanatics I encountered were one and the same. I immediately remembered the anger within me that I felt, knowing that these ogres were now facing the same sinister fanatics that had initiated those atrocities in Nargo Kingdom that I had recently witnessed. Immediately at that point, I decided that if I could be of help to these victims of the madmen, then I would. Remembering the rune of return that had been handed to me in Elvia, I looked up and asked, "If you follow me, I can lead you to Elvia. They have cut themselves off from the outside world, but I can get you inside the lands of the Shaloran, where you will be safe." The ogres immediately looked up at me as I stated those words, though it appeared to be a look of shock and irritation more than anything else. "You would suggest we go to the Shaloran. Weren't they the ones behind this Spellblaze? We would be peacefully going about our lives if it wasn't for them turning the world upside down." Keeping my calm, I decided to try and persuade the ogres to go to Elvia, replying, "Where else might you go to survive?" To this I received several frowns, but one part of the question asked, would they even help us? Would we even be safe? I stopped for a moment at the first question that was asked before responding. They are unable to help the outside world as a result of the actions from those same zealots that captured you. However, I know that they feel deeply for what they have done, and I believe they will offer you sanctuary if you go to them. If you have nowhere else to go, then allow me to bring you to them for shelter. As I finished, I noticed one ogre staring back. Some of the ogres noticed this and looked to the ogre as well before asking, "Is it them?" Carefully looking at the ogre, I saw some sort of dark blue glow covering his eyes, as if allowing him to peer at something. Suddenly the ogre piped up all at once, "We need to move." All of a sudden, I could see a grave expression take hold of every ogre in the group. One seemed to begin muttering in a panicked manner, What do we do?" under their breath repeatedly. A bit confused at this, I asked, "What is it?" The ogre who had been looking back quickly turned and came to me, looking deeply into my face with his eyes that had been glowing before, as if looking for something. Finally he stated in a deep, ominous voice, "You better not try to deceive us, Thalore. Now take us to Elvia. We need to move, now." Taken off guard by the abruptness of the van, I simply stammered out, "Okay?" The ogre, not missing a beat, called to the others, "Let's go." Quickly he grabbed my arm, and we began to run, the thunderous sounds of the other ogres soon following. Recklessly, we seemed to charge through the death traps of the land, jumping small chasms and skirting past sharp rock. What had taken me what had seemed a day to traverse, we seemingly traveled in an hour. The ogre that kept a hold of my arm and sometimes lifted me up to avoid the hazards of the ground. We continued to run until I could see the shoreline. Pointing out the western direction that we needed to go with our arm, the group swiftly turned and we began dodging the patches of lava. Beginning to pant and weave at this point, the ogre holding my arm finally began to slow down. Stopping, he turned his head to look to our rear, the same dark blue glow appearing over his eyes once more. No longer content with my ignorance, I finally asked what he was doing. The dark blue glow immediately faded as the ogre looked at me directly before giving a response. "I take it you aren't very well versed in ruins, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. I take it you aren't very well versed in ruins. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, being how averse you Thaloran are to the arcane. I'm using a rune that grants me vision of what the terrain is like around me, though I'm not necessarily using it for a specific purpose right now." The ogre stopped talking for a moment to look back again. Chiming in to continue the explanation, another ogre stated, "He's looking back to see how far away those zealots chasing us from their encampment are. We were being chased. I suppose I shouldn't have expected any less from those magic-hating fanatics. Like they would very much want to recapture the ogres for whatever nefarious intentions they had. I began to recall the events I had recently witnessed, them perpetrate, and how I felt sick afterwards. I wondered what atrocities these ogres had suffered by their hands. Looking to stop myself from recalling any more of these terrible memories, I quickly pressed the ogre on how they knew we were being chased. To give you the short version, this vision rune is giving him the power to see the general location of the individuals pursuing us. There's a bit more to it than that, but for our purposes, he can get a pretty good glimpse of where the zealots following us are and how close they are relative to our position. Rather impressed that the ogres should do that, I wondered what other feats the runes could allow the ogres to do. I figured when we were in relative safety that maybe I should ask the ogres a bit more about what their runes. Suddenly, though, I heard a curse, and I turned to see the dark blue glowing eyes of the ogre now seemingly peering ahead of us at something else. Asking him what was wrong, the dark blue glow went away from the ogre's eyes and quietly received a grave response. There is a group of people in front of us, and they are definitely zealots among them too. At this, the other ogre's faces turned to look at total dismay. I could hear the yelling from behind me. "What do we do now?" one said. "I don't want to go back," another would say. Cowardly words spewed from the mouth of the new ogre every moment until it seemed everyone in the group was erupting in fear. For a moment, the sorry display continued until finally the ogre holding my arm let go and yelled at the others. "Enough of your civiling!" The other ogres went silent at this, now looking up as if waiting for directions on what to do. Alright, so, this basically, little expert right here. I want to note that basically, when I basically was writing this, about the vision rune and, stuff like that, it's actually something that's worth advising from, the developers of this game, but it's generally not a good idea to actually, incorporate, runes or, other, specific, items in the game into, your lore, because it may change, or, it may be that, certain, things will be, removed from, the game. I'm not sure if I've actually seen a vision rune basically in a while, but vision runes are basically they basically allow you to sort of map out territory and see distinct types of races basically around yourself. So that's basically how they basically sort of worked. I don't think that's basically available anymore for runes, but maybe they're still around vision runes, and I've just yet to see any for a while. Now I want to note by the way that what's basically going on here with these guys basically down here, they're sort of stealing and stuff like that. I want to note that basically, ogres basically, of course, have lower willpower than the other races, and this is sort of sort of building on that sort of aesthetic of ogres basically being they're less willing to basically endure basically hardship, so to speak. They'll basically be strong fighters and stuff like that, but if someone basically casts a spell to hit them, they're not going to be able to resist it very well. So that's just something I note with the the ogres here basically, but whatever. And, think about it, let's just go check out the rune shop here, perhaps in, Last Hope, and maybe we'll actually see a vision rune so I can actually show it off to you, so... There is, of course, a rune shop here, so let's go look for it. So we have, Blink runes, we have, Shielding rune, Acid rune... And if I go down to Elevate, maybe we'll, see some other runes basically here. I don't know if these, runes basically are still around, but, if I can basically show you guys while I just, do so. I'm actually, wondering now if basically they exist anymore, but whatever. So, Acid Wave, Blink, Shielding, Teleportation. So, those are still all basically in. And we go to England to basically look around here, I guess, so... Let's go to the rune shop here. That's an alchemist, not what I want. That's not what I want either. See, I'm getting the feeling, by the way, that they probably took out the vision runes, and I probably don't really blame the developers actually taking, getting rid of the vision runes, because those are actually runes that, people aren't really using, but, I I guess like basically like, you can still like here's something to note by the way. It is like worth knowing that like it could actually be like sort of like drawn up that basically like vision runes were basically like they sort of like phased out of like existence, so to speak, because no one really used them anymore. Simply for the fact that like this like takes part of history basically back like during the time of Spellblazed. So times may have changed and people may no longer basically use those runes basically for like use and such. All right, so let's just keep going on here. We still have like battle preparations to go through, so let's get to it. I had never seen a battle before in my life, let alone been a part of one. However, I do not believe this is necessarily the case for the ogres. They say that they live as nomadic peddlers, but I wonder if perhaps that was just a cover story for themselves. Maybe they hired themselves out as mercenaries, or other such adventures of combat. It is hard to know what lies within their past. So this sort of like builds upon like the fact that like we don't know much about the histories of ogres, and they were of course like created by the conflict to fight, but whether they say like still like dealt with that basically or not, that's like a thing. But whatever. All right, so realizing the situation at hand, the ogre who had moments ago been holding my arm this entire time now took up the task of preparing the other ogres for the fight at hand. Stepping forward to address the others, he quickly broke into a speech. The enemy is on both sides of us, but we aren't trapped yet. Those behind us have to travel through the treacherous ground we had to pass through here ourselves, and those ahead of us are still some distance away. We have time to form a plan and prepare for battle before either group arrives. As the ogres finished, one of the others soon piped up. What will you have us do, Commander? The newly minted commander grunted before replying. First, we need a plan of attack. To this, another ogre stepped up and stated, how fast is each group moving towards us? Which one will be on us first? At this, the commander paused for a moment before taking a look in front and behind him at the two approaching groups. When he was finished, he replied, the ones behind us are closer, but it looks like they are only slowly navigating the landscape we crossed due to all the hazards. The other group is approaching at rapid speed. They will likely get to us first. Do you think we should hit the first group first, strategist? I could see the strategist raise his head and smile a bit upon being named before stating, yes sir. Maybe we can punch through them before getting hit in our rear. The commander nodded to this and then noted, we don't have any weapons to fight with, but we can use the environment to our advantage. Knock them into hostile terrain, use choke points in the land to avoid being overwhelmed by our numbers, fight dirty and kick the blackened dirt into their faces. The commander stopped to take a breath before hollering, we will not be going back. To this the other ogres hollered the same, we will not be going back. Then all the ogres broke into a resounding roar as they raised both their arms and their voices, shaking their hands while making odd gestures with them and completely showing no more signs of the craven display I just witnessed of them moments ago. I immediately noticed the bigger ogres break off towards several dead trees, and with surprising ease rip them from the ground. After breaking the branches and roots off, they proceeded to swing the trunks around like giant clubs. More ingenious ogres ripped their clothing into careful strips. Taking their belts off, they fashioned them together with strips to construct crude slings. Other ogres collected rocks and piled them on the ground nearby, ammo I assume for the slings. Other ogres seemed to pair off with each other and perform odd poses one after the other. When finished, they would seem to begin to punch and kick in the air, which I assume was practice for fighting unarmed. I stood awestruck at the sight of the ogres and their astounding ability to turn into a fighting force. I didn't even notice when their commander came up to me. Attempting to get my attention, he loud stated, "Thalore, focus!" I snapped my head quickly in his direction. Well, what? I stammered my words as I quickly zoned back into my immediate situation. Do you have anything that can be used to help us out? Registering the words of the ogre, I quickly pulled my pack off my shoulders and reached in to display the contents. This is all I have, I said. The commander peered into the bag, then reached in to grab the hatchet and a utility knife that I purchased back in Argo Kingdom. He weighed the two objects in each hand, then taking the hatchet he proceeded to take a few swings of it. Wearing a satisfied expression, he handed the knife back to me and said, I can't use this, it's too small for my hands to use effectively. You take it and use it to defend yourself. Hearing those words, I soon realized something. I would be in this fight. While I might have chased off a hungry animal or two, I didn't actually have any combat experience against a real foe. The commander seeing my discouraged face then said, "That you have come this far, I can tell you aren't with those zealots. If need be, just run, and save yourself. They likely will let you go. It is us Aurors that are after, not you." The words pierced through me, making me quite angry. Shouting back at the commander, I responded, "No, I will fight with you." I'm not sure if it was the anger with me that caused me to say those words, but I knew that I would not let the Aurors fight alone. I might die in a fight, but I would not run from it. To this, the commander and the other Aurors quickly glanced my direction, surprised but nonetheless happy. One Auror gave a cheerful shout, "To battle!" The other Aurors soon shouted, "To battle!" as well. Smiling, the commander raised his hand to signal the other Aurors to be silent before giving a silent nod to me and saying to me, "To battle." The commander didn't give much more time for the other Aurors to get themselves ready, likely mindful of the group coming from behind us. Giving a command for the Aurors to gather, he formed them into several small groups. I was told to join the group closest to the sea, while the commander assumed his position in the middle group. When the Aurors were assembled, he gave the order to advance, and we quickly began to forge ahead over the landscape. The hazards of the land prevented each group from keeping pace with each other, though each individual group moved in a fairly disciplined manner. I dodged lava, uneven ground, burnt foliage, and the crashing waves of boiling water as I tried to keep up with my group. This would continue until we could see the image of the group of fanatics in front of us. So this sort of builds upon the fact that the ogres were essentially a fighting force for the conclave, and even though they could be peaceful people for the most part, when it comes to war, they know what to do. They're they're war ready, basically, so to speak. So they're basically already getting ready. They know what to basically do to get ready to fight, and now they're basically going out and basically do it, so to speak. All right, we'll get to battle in a moment, but I'm gonna just take a swig of water here, because of course I'm being thirsty from constantly talking about this. All right, so. Due to the darkness of the sky and the scorched lands of the battlefield, it was hard to see anything, but I still remember the sounds of battle in great detail. The bubbling sounds of the lava and the boiling water, the war cries that filled the air, the magically discharges from the ogre's ruins, the sounds of weapons clashing against each other, and so forth. Of course, none of those sounds compared to the death cries of both the zealots and the ogres when their lives ceased to be. So, war, it's bad, but whatever. As we closed in, I could make out the image of the individual fanatical warriors in the opposing force arrayed against us. Their battle line consisted of a couple of rows, with fighters in the front and archers in back. Considerably outnumbered, it looked as if they were it looked as if they had the upper hand over us, though I wondered if this was entirely the case. Many weren't wearing masks, and their tattered clothing reminded me of the refugees in the Nargal Kingdom. Perhaps they were new initiates, swayed to join by the words of the masked zealots who stood with them. All the initiates wielded weapons, but even I could tell that they had little idea of how to hold them properly. The masked zealots within the group were a different story. They held their weapons well, and a few of them wore armor. The metal gleamed in the darkness as the light from the surrounding lava bounced off the metallic plates, chains, and rivets lining their bodies. Most stood in the front line, even some of those with a bow or sling in hand, likely to encourage their new initiates by leading from the front. Of those with a mask over their face, I recognized one as well, the halfling I encountered in a tent from Nargal Kingdom. Unlike the others, the halflings still wore the same leather armor from the first meeting of ours. I remember those swift movements the halflings had made, and wondered how much of a difficult and bloody fight this might come to be. Voices rang out from the zealots as they prepared the initiates around them to defend themselves. Shots and arrows came towards us with lightning speed as they advanced, causing a couple of ogres to howl as they were hit by incoming fire. Those ogres with makeshift slings in their ranks soon began to throw rocks into the opposing line. Many of their shots peppered the initiates in the front, causing those to holler in pain. Tired about dazed and confused, and otherwise bring disorder to the fanatics' lines. Then I heard a call from our commander, causing us to stop a small distance away from their line. The fanatics looked at the Orders with confused faces. I must say I did so as well, before I noticed several of the Orders raised their arms up. All at once, an array of colors lit up our darkened surroundings as the scenes on their ruin-covered skin began to glow. As I looked at one of the Orders near me, I could see a light green glow encircle his arm, and then a torrent of acid appear. The acid lashed out at several of the fanatics, drenching their bodies and causing their exposed skin to visibly burn. Then a flash of lightning shot forward from behind me, piercing through a zealot and one of the initiates behind him. All at once, many of the fanatics in front of us began to scour for cover, unable to cope with the onslaught of power that the Orders were unleashing on them. Many of the initiates fell to the magical barrage, while others began to break ranks from the opposing line and flee. It looked as if we had the fanatics on their back foot, but then I heard a piercing cry. The screeching sound sounded very much like what I heard from back in Nargle Kingdom. As I looked around to survey what was happening, I noticed all at once my surroundings had darkened again. I could see many of the Ogres near me try to raise their arms, but the light from their skin had now dimmed and failed to work anymore. Ahead of us, many of the fanatics lay on the ground, injured or dead, though many of them still stood ready to fight. All at once, they seemed to cheer and beat their swords, apparently not dissuaded by the Ogres' efforts against them. Out of the corner of my eye, though, I noticed a figure charge forward. Running by some lava, I could see that it was our commander, gritting his teeth, and my hatchet in hand, as it glistened from light of the lava. Pulling back his arm, he approached one of the masked zealots and gave him a blow that sent him reeling backwards through the air into a pool of lava. I remember feeling a dark sense of satisfaction as I saw the first zealot burn alive, a fitting end for one who likely took part in the burnings I had witnessed before. The hooting and hollering from the enemy ceased at this, while the commander turned to shake an initiate nearby to him. With a simple swipe of the hatchet, the Ogre sliced the inmate's head clean from his body, causing it to sail through the air and land on the ground a fair distance away. The mere sight of the commander in action inspired the Ogres, who immediately charged to join in the carnage. Visibly unnerved now at the wall of giant figures moving against them, many of the remaining initiates began to flee, as the Ogres approached. Many of the masked zealots stayed to fight, but they were soon set upon and clobbered to death by both fists and tree trunks. Those zealots that wore armor would put up more of a fight, though one by one they were being taken out too. The enemy was falling before us, and I was sure that the battle was nearly won. That is until I saw an ogre sail through the air above me, landing in the boiling waters of the sea nearby. One by one, other ogres began to join a growing chorus of agonizing cries as something set upon them. Peering out into the shadows, I could see a small image rushing all around the battlefield in the direction of their origin. Suddenly, as the image came to stop near a lake of lava, I realized it was the masked halfling in leather armor. Catching an ogre nearby to the lava, unaware, the halfling somehow knocked the ogre over, sending the ogre into the hot pool of burning death. Out of the darkness, a couple more ogres appeared, and one attempted to clobber the halfling with a violent blow. With a simple crouch, the halfling ducked before quickly jabbing at the ogre's stomach and jumping up to land a devastating kick against the ogre's head. The other ogre soon moved to attack the halfling, but with a sidestep the halfling simply moved out of the way before disappearing into the darkness. The ogre followed, but from the grunting and yelling, it seemed that the ogre did not fare very well. The halfling would emerge again and again, knocking ogres down with seemingly ease before escaping from counterattack. Ogres in the darkness would be attacked and shout in pain, while those who stayed too close to the hazards of the landscape would soon find themselves sent spiraling into the death traps of the land. In an instant the battle had shifted in the fanatics' favor, and panic and fear was beginning to sweep over the ogres. So, a note that basically just shows us how powerful this halfling basically is for the most part, that they basically encountered basically before. It also basically shows as well as about how trained basically the ogres basically are, even ones that aren't really naturally they're naturally basically gifted in combat, the ogres, but at the same time against a really trained foe like the halfling, they're sort of not that trained. So it basically is sort of shows a power scaling of these guys, basically, or it's far more experienced than some ragtag humans and stuff like that, but not against an actual trained individual itself. Now it also shows by the way this like sort of battle that like these are very much like the Ziguranth like anti-magic like forces, so to speak, because they have like the ability to like howl and like cause like silence toward like spellcasting and stuff like that, and that very much like happens to like the ogres and the ruins basically here. Now it's worth knowing by the way that like at the same time you also see that the acid wave ruin is like sort of being used in like this like sort of plot here, because essentially like lightning and acid and everything else coming from the ogres is basically being used, but not necessarily like taken out of the game just yet, so that's a thing as well, but whatever. Alright, so let's keep going. Dark Resolve. It is hard to describe the sensation that came over me. It was still me, but I didn't feel it in control. That other me, it seemed to thrive on the violence I had inflicted or received, and wanted nothing more than to endlessly kill. It caused me sadness, and I inflicted misery and terror on those in front of me as they died screaming in agony and pain. It is someone I hope to never become again. All around me, I could see the ogres near to me beginning to lose any will to fight. What's worse is that some of the initiates that had fled had now returned. They began to batter the shields once more, hollering and posturing as they cheered on a halfling. From one of them I heard the phrase, "Hooray for nature's champion!" They would yell other phrases as well, such as "Nature's might shall prevail," or "The ogre's magical taint on the alley ends." The sheer display of strength from the halfling and the cry of the initiates further unnerved the ogres. So much so that some began to shake in fear and turn into cowards yet again. In front of me, an ogre even dropped her weapons and fell to the ground, having lost all hope. I could feel tears begin to stream down my eyes. I could feel the anguish and dismay of the ogres, and the hateful emotions being directed at them. I remembered the burning event back in the Nargle Kingdom, and how zealots instigated those initial actions I had witnessed. It made me angry. Angry at those inflicting pain, inflicting it for their petty reasons. The ogres didn't deserve this, nor did the innocent victims that the fanatics burned alive from before. Those inflicting pain, producing these atrocities, they were insufferable gnats, and what's more, they disparaged nature's name while doing so. I felt I had to do something to keep them from this from happening again. I felt I needed to kill them. "Does the little thalore wish to leave?" I heard a voice say to me. "Maybe run back to that little forest of yours." I looked up to see a masked dwarf, holding an axe and shield. "We know of ya, Fay Willows. Ye have no tainted magic, yet are ya an ally of nature. From where ye stand, it would seem that you are an ally of the ogres." The dwarf brandished the weapon wildly, as it continued to talk. Perhaps I shouldn't be blaming ya. I'm sure the ogres told you some wild tales, and this is just a misunderstanding. We just want to help the ogres, and they seem to be getting a little bit more cooperative now. It is a shame a few of them had to die, but a message had to be sent. The dwarf seemingly began to chuckle for a moment as he finished speaking. The dwarf stopped chuckling to continue. "How about you cooperate with us as well, Elfie? Else I'm afraid I'm going to have to..." All at once, the sounds of battle seemed to disappear, as I focused slowly on the dwarf in front of me. Looking forward, all I could see was blood. Blood on my hand, on my arm, and on a dagger that lay plunged in the throat of the dwarf. On the mask the dwarf wore, and from under the mask as the dwarf coughed up blood. Dropping the axe and shield to grasp at the dagger, the dwarf choked as it tried to breathe. Slowly I bent down to pick up the axe, and with both hands I brought it back behind my head. Then with all my strength I brought the axe down ahead of the dwarf with all my might. I felt a strange feeling within me as the dwarf died to the blow, coursing through every fibre of my being. At that moment, I recalled the adorable halfling I killed from before when I initially first traveled from my home. I had hated the reasons said in support of the Spellblazed, and I became angered to no end of no one spying that nonsense. I had followed the halfling out with a steak knife that I had taken from a nearby table, and I killed him. It was a horrible feeling taking a life, yet a dark surge of energy coursed through me, wanting to drive me to kill more. This drive to kill, it was the real reason I had fled the settlement. I was afraid I would kill someone who didn't deserve it. The halfling I killed didn't deserve to die. But these zealots, didn't they deserve it? At that point, something snapped in my mind, I think. I remember laughing very loudly. It was a dreadful feeling. I might have been crying too. I couldn't tell what was happening with me or my emotions, and I wondered if I was going mad. I still wonder this even now, to be honest. But that wasn't important. The ogres around me could no longer fight, and I knew that if nothing was done, that they would die or worse. There was no innocence to be found from these zealots. They were instigators of torment and madness, or the initiatives blindly following them. I could simply kill them all with a clear conscience, and hopefully satisfy the urges within me to kill. All would be well with me after that, and perhaps the ogres would even thank me for saving them. Then I noticed the masked human zealot looking at me and the corpse of a dwarf on the ground. I began to walk over, the human seemingly waving his sword in one hand in a threatening manner. For some reason I thought it was kind of funny, despite what should have caused me to think of an intense fear of my own well-being. I could hear muffled shouts of something coming from the human, though I couldn't distinguish what was being said. As I drew closer, I saw the human shake, so much so that the mask shifted enough that I could partially see the face of the man underneath. I could see the fear in his eyes before the human raised his shield in an attempt to hide away. I remember the enjoyment I felt of that fear. I used my axe to sweep the shield from the human's hands, knocking it away so it couldn't hide his eyes away from mine anymore, allowing me to relish in his terror. I think I was smiling at this point, grinning madly as the fears built up in the human. At the same time, though, the sadness inside me, it too was building more and more, threatening to plunge me into the depths of darkness. The human was terrified and attempted to thrust forward to attack me, crying out something as he lunged towards. Where was he attacking, actually? I think he intended to attack me, but he ended up moving over to the side. I simply raised the axe in my hand, as I had done before, brought it down, connecting a deep blow to his shoulder. The human's sword arm fell away from his body, causing him to cry out before dropping to the ground, the hole where his arm used to be. The red blood spurted and bubbled from his severed arm as the sword still lay clutched in the closest hand. The human tried to crawl away, and then I noticed the lovely pool of lava nearby. I smiled a little as I kicked it by, sending him spiraling in. I felt a strange sense of joy as it burned alive in front of me, yet simultaneously felt disdain for what I had just done. I felt another surge of energy course through me as the man finally died, and I felt a greater urge to kill even more. I wondered at this point if I could stop myself, or if I could be stopped. I could hear the screams of terror approaching around me, and noticed that the sounds weren't coming from those who were masked either. Easy pickings to satisfy my urge to kill. I began to approach them as they yelled at me, my intense hatred building with each step. Suddenly, though, I felt a strong pull on my arm, preventing me from moving forward. Looking to see what I caught on, I noticed the masked halfling touch my arm. Hatred surged within me, and all I could think of was how I should pay this halfling back for what he had done to me in that tent from before. I forgot about the other weaklings, focusing my attention towards my new prey. Alright, so basically, computers to build on the fact that, ogres have very weak willpower, and, if, a lot of, bad stuff basically happens, they basically, will, become, a lot more, dismayed and stuff like that than, the other races, but whatever. Now, I won't really talk about, Fay here, but, I'll note that basically, she isn't a normal, thalore, and, well, you'll basically, if you haven't really, caught to the hints yet, you'll probably, catch on to the next chapter, but, let's just read on, I guess, to the next chapter, I guess, first. Hateful Wrath. I'm not sure how big the fanatics group was when we battled them, though out of them only about 20 or so wore masks. What I do know is that when I first saw the ogres, that they numbered over 50. After the battle, there was only 9 of them with me when we made our escape. This isn't to say that all the other ogres were killed, though. I wonder what cruel end they met at the hands of those fanatics when we left them in. Alright, so, unlike the other zealots, I can remember some of the words that came from the halfling on that battlefield. I should have killed you. A mistake to spare me, and so forth. All of a sudden, though, the halfling stopped talking as I felt something deep within me come out, an overwhelming hatred that I seemed to have challenged the halfling's body. While this happened, I took my other arm and raised the axe high, bringing down its backside on the halfling's shoulder in an effort to escape his grip. I could feel the power of his blow as it connected, the force of the impact reverberating through both our bodies. I could hear the halfling clench its teeth, feeling the pain from the blow, before I was quickly thrown to the ground. Almost immediately I got up, with feelings full of violence that I was ready to unleash. I don't know what happened next, but I immediately remembered striking the halfling back, somehow seemingly moving around in an instant. A howl of pain erupted from the halfling as the blow connected. The halfling attempted to jab at me furiously in response, but I simply used my free hand to knock away the meager blows before beginning to make an all-out assault. Blow after blow struck my prey, leaving deep gashes in the halfling's armor. At this point, I could remember the grin on my face, tearing at my face muscles in a natural way, and a hatred within me unleashing with every blow. The halfling, not amused by my attacks, attempted to strike back with a series of kicks. I remember receiving several hits to my body, though feeling little from them. I immediately swiped back at the halfling, though the blow was easily dodged, before a fury of punches were released against me. Annoyed now, I retaliated wildly with a slash with an axe, relishing a scream unleashed into the air by the halfling as my attack connected, cutting deep through the leather armor into the flesh underneath. At this point, the halfling began to cough up blood, suffering greatly from the inflicted wound. I could feel my hatred burning within the halfling now, tearing at the insides from the wound I had just inflicted. It was an intoxicating feeling. My emotions completely enveloped me at that point, as I began to swing the axe relentlessly, with little care of what I hit. The halfling tried to dodge my blows, but a number of them hit home. Blood flew as I sliced at the halfling, and possibly some of the other fanatics that unfortunately happened in my path. Finally, having enough of this, the halfling made a swift move in the other direction to get away from me, attempting to escape the retribution I was bringing forth. The halfling dropped close to the ground, the injuries I had rendered now taking their toll. I could hear murmuring around me too, noticing all the fanatics, both Nish and zealots, backing away. Thinking about what I should do next, I felt the large hand on my shoulder turn me about so I could see the face of the Aura strategist. Talking quickly, the strategist relayed to me in a witted voice. "We can't linger here anymore. The other zealots behind us are closing in. We need to push through and get out of here." Looking behind me, I could see the figures approaching rapidly, a far larger group and likely much better armed and armored. As the light flickered off the wall of metal coming for us. However, looking ahead, I saw only a handful of initiatives of zealots left, and knew that if we broke through them, then at least the Aura still fighting could get to safety. I called out to the Auras to break through now, before charging towards the terrifying fanatics ahead of me. The remaining Auras who were still fighting saw this and began to rally, and then moved forward towards the freedom we sought. There was no resistance left to be found in the fanatics. The morale was completely broken. Some who couldn't scramble out of the way were trampled as we ran over them. Looking back at the battlefield, I caught a glimpse of the halfling, who stared at me with a cold hatred, but at the same time could not do any more. I could feel a bit of satisfaction rise within me for snubbing the zealots and for helping to at least get those ogres now with me away. Many of the ogres had fallen during the battle, many killed by the halfling's hands. Some ogres remained on the battlefield, alive but too injured to follow, or too demoralized in the case of some. Like that female ogre I had witnessed collapsing to the ground, left to the whims of the zealots. There was no way for us to retrieve them. The other group of zealots had already caught up and had begun their pursuit of us, and wouldn't stop chasing us for a long time. Even after they disappeared from view, we continued to run for a long while. When we did stop, it was only after one of the ogres had fallen down to the wounds inflicted in the recent battle. Making my way over to the ogre, I was quick to treat her wounds. The ogre commander had managed to survive the battle, though he had also had injuries visible all over his body, and quickly came over to be treated. The ogre strategist was quick to take charge at this point in the journey, telling me to only use the infusions enough to close their wounds so that we could get moving again. Eventually later, when we stopped again to gather our breath, I would continue my treatment with my remaining infusions as best I could. After that, we would run a distance, stop to rest, and run again several times. It felt as if we didn't stop running until after the sun became visible in the sky once more. Alright, so if it isn't really apparent right now, it's worth knowing that Fay Willows is basically a cursed character. And, like, you know, basically the hatred that she basically feels, sort of like the actions she basically took in this battle. You can basically see like she's like sort of like blindsiding around people. She's basically like, you know, rampaging through them like, you know, nothing. She's basically like, you know, recklessly charging through everything with like, you know, little like regard to herself. Any blow she basically takes, she doesn't like really feel pain for. So she's essentially like, you know, she's basically like, you know, cursed basically in like all forms basically, so to speak. And essentially like, you know, the brawler there. You can also see a little bit of his techniques as well, because like, you know, obviously he grappled Fay, but you know, it really didn't really amount to much, because like, you know, Fay could just like easily like, you know, cause like her like, you know, mental attacks basically back on the halfling with like little like, you know, effort. So obviously like, you know, the gloom basically is like being a thing here. You also have like a little bit of like, you know, the other like sort of like techniques, like the ability to like, you know, put like your like, you know, the mental like, you know, image like basically down a guy to like, you know, lock him down and keep him moving. I forget the actual skill name for it, but you know, you understand basically what, you know, she's basically a curse basically in all her forms here. Now, in many ways, I sort of like felt like it sort of like turned like Fay Willows into like sort of like a Mary Sue here, because like, you know, all of a sudden like she's like, you know, as strong as like, you know, as strong as like curse basically you probably ever fought in a game. But you know, I sort of felt like, you know, she's basically been on a drain for like just like, you know, a little while, so she probably accrued a little bit of experience, so maybe she's like, you know, not like completely weak. Anyhow, that basically brings us to the end of like, you know, book 3 here, where we basically like, you know, are like doing like the ogres, and like, you know, they're like basically, you know, they're like retreat from like, you know, Zigur. And you know, hopefully like, you know, this is like, you know, a good little introduction to like the lore basically, so like, you know, made basically for like, you know, the ogres as well as like the curse and like the brawler here. But whatever. There's still basically our book basically get, and that's basically outside Zigur. That'll be basically like book 4 basically over here in like, you know, Elvia. That's basically right here. So, book 4, basically like, you know, exhaustive travel all the way down to like rebuilding anew. Now, it's worth knowing, by the way, I actually wrote 5 books, and essentially the first 4 books are basically available in like the libraries of like Zigur and like, you know, Elvia. But the 5th book is basically like, you know, elsewhere in the game, I think, if it's basically in the game. And I'll note that basically the 5th book is like, you know, very much separate from the other 4 books, because it basically like sort of like takes like, you know, place far after these events, so they're not really like tied to like the other books at all. But whatever. We'll get to that like at some point, and now I just want to test something. So before I basically quaff like the potion of undeath, basically, right? So yeah, quaff is on the world map. Let's just see. So this is a test basically. I can't use it on a world map. Okay, so that's fine. We're just gonna use it right here. See, I know that basically just gives you like, you know, basically a death buffer, so to speak. So, you know, you don't immediately die when you basically, you know, take too much damage, but whatever. Alright, so it doesn't seem like it's affecting me at all, so I can still go into Zigur here. That's good. Now, I won't necessarily get rid of this character right away, by the way, because there's actually like reason to like, you know, keep it for like, you know, anti-magic purposes. There's still basically Krog to unlock, and like, you know, that's basically done here, so I'll probably talk to this guy at some point. I'll also have to get a little bit stronger basically for it, but you know, you get the idea. We'll be doing like, you know, the event to like, you know, try and like, you know, liberate the Krog, so to speak, so maybe basically unlock him for use. But that's what I do in my own time for now. Hope you guys basically enjoy like the 3rd book. And technically I actually have the might of actually buy the 4th book, so I may actually like, you know, just jump into that basically like, you know, very soon. But we'll try and have like a proper like, you know, playthrough like, you know, in next episodes. That'll be fine. So for now, just take care.